SSRS, templates, RDL, and advanced reports. You already understand the basics of creating an SSRS report. In this nugget, we're going to take a look at templates so you can have a more consistent look and feel among your different reports. Once we do that, then I'll show you how to programmatically generate RDL files. This is going to save you a lot of time in the end if you have a large quantity of reports that you need to generate. We'll also take a look at matrix reports, otherwise known as crosstab reports. This will be useful if you need to show column and row information along with the underlying data. In addition to those crosstab or matrix reports, we can also add third-party controls. Out of the box, SSRS provides a lot of controls, but there will be times when you need to have extra functionality. So I'll show you how you would add one of those controls. Let's get started with creating our report templates. Oftentimes you want to create numerous reports that have the same consistent look and feel across all those reports. For example, you might create a report that has the same copyright information at the bottom, as well as the same logo in the upper left-hand corner. Well, to implement that, we use templates. And the way we create a template is simply we create an RDL file. In other words, we just create a regular report. But when it comes time to saving it, we save it in a special location, which turns it into a template. Let me show you how that's done. I'm going to create a new project, and we'll make this a report server project. We don't really care what the name is at this point. And under reports, I'll just right click on here and we'll say add new item, and we'll just stick with this generic report right there. Once again, I don't care what the name is. And then we can go to our toolbox and we can drag a table over here. Now it's going to ask us about connection information, but we really don't care about that because from report to report it might vary. So if you don't care about that, then just hit cancel and we just have this naked table right here. Now let's customize this a little bit. I want to put an image in the upper left-hand corner. And so we'll call this CBT logo. We can even put a tooltip here. Visit us at www.cbtnuggets.com, and we can specify which image to use. I've actually saved an image directly under my C drive. Make sure I say all files, and here it is right there. Okay, so you can specify, the border and visibility and all that. You can even turn it into a link by clicking on Action and say Go to URL. And then we hit OK right there. So there's our logo. Now, if I want to add a footer at the bottom of my page, I can just right-click on the page itself and say Insert, Page Footer. So there's the little footer. I'm going to now drag a text box onto there. Make this a little bit wider, and we'll put some meaningful text in there. Double click in there, and we'll say Copyright 2009 CBT Nuggets. So far, so good. We are not populating any of this other data. We just have a skeleton look and feel. Another thing we can do is right-click on this footer area, and we can go to the properties. And for the fill, let's just do a contrasting color. We'll put in there khaki. And so now it looks a little bit nicer. You can do the same thing with the header if you want to. And to turn this into a template, all we need to do is say File, Save As, and there's a special location where this needs to go. I'm going to start with C drive so you can see exactly where to go. We're going to the Program Files, and then Microsoft Visual Studio 9.0, Common 7, IDE. Then we go to our private assemblies, which is right there. I know this is a long path, but this is where we need to save it. And then Project Items, and then Report Project. And you'll see that there's already a report definition file right there. And we can save this as CBT template .rdl. So now that we've done that, look at what happens when I right-click on reports, and we can go ahead and add a new item, and CBT template automatically shows up there. And so this is a good starting point. Now I can tweak this report any way I want to. So now I can go back to this report area right here, and I can say, hey, I've got a new data set. The data source, well, there isn't any data source right now to choose from, so I'll create a new one, and we'll go ahead and make sure we connect to our local host or whatever server your database is on. And then click on Query Designer. We'll just do a really simple report here. Add table, and let's just do a report on the employees. We'll just display the employee key as well as their first name and last name. And let's order by last name and first name. We've got that. We can go ahead and preview it now. We've defined our data set. Now we need to drag and drop these different fields onto our actual table. So let's set this employee key right there, and let's drag the last name as well as the first name. And now we can preview this. There are our employees. So once again, to create the template, all you need to do is create a regular report, however you want to create it, and save it in that particular location that I showed you. Now there will be times when you want to generate a massive amount of reports dynamically. I mean, as you can see, to create a report graphically is pretty easy, but it can be time-consuming if you're dealing with a quantity of reports. So it is possible to use Visual Basic or C# to dynamically generate the XML code behind the RDL file. That's what I want to show you next. In my example, I'm going to use Visual Basic, so I just have Visual Basic 2008 Express Edition. You can use some other tool if you want to. And essentially I'm going to create a new project. And I'll just make this a console application. I'll call this Generate RDL. Call it whatever you want to. And you'll see here that we have this file called module1.vb, and we have some skeleton code right there. I'm going to clobber this code right here with my own code, and it is pretty verbose. I don't expect you to remember this all, but you can find the skeleton code on the MSDN Books Online documentation. So let me just show you what this entails. Move this over here a little bit. You'll see that we have a handful of import statements because we're using some classes that depend on those. And we're creating our own namespace so it doesn't collide with other possible namespaces. And we're going to call our class RDL generator, but really you can call yours anything you want to. We have several private variables here, one that represents a connection object, another one that represents our connection string to the underlying database, as well as a command text, and then an array list of the fields representing the result set when you call the SQL statement to your database. You'll see that in our main subroutine, all we're doing is instantiating a new RDL generator object. This line right here is calling the run function, which is defined right down here. This run function, in turn, is calling other methods that we've defined. For example, it's calling open connection, generate fields list, and so on. So let's focus on our open connection. The open connection instantiates a new SQL connection object, and then the connect string just defines where the database is, so in our case it's localhost, and then the name of the database that we're tapping into. So in my case it's AdventureWorks DW 2008, and we're using integrated security. Our connection string, we're just setting it to this guy that we just defined a minute ago, and then we're opening a connection to our database. The next thing it's doing, you'll see here it's calling the generate field list, so let's go to that subroutine. We have a couple local variables here. One is for the command, the other is for the SQL data reader, which lets us extract the result set from our SQL query. So here's our actual SQL statement. We're selecting the employee key, last name, first name from dim employee. We're then setting our command text. So then our execute reader returns this guy right here, and then we can use that reader object to extract the information. So we've got a for loop right here that's just looping through the different fields of our result set. So this makes it very dynamic. Our select statement can change in structure considerably, and we won't have to change anything else in our actual code here. So then the next step that's happening is it's calling the generate RDL. Let's take a look at that subroutine. Generate RDL is actually generating the XML code behind our report. Now this might look a little bit complex, but if we pick it apart, you'll see that it's not that complicated. Here we're opening up a stream for writing. Okay, so our end result will be a file called mympreport.rdl. We have a writer object, which is a XML text writer. It's using UTF-8 encoding. And we are causing this to be indented so it's a little bit easier to read. We're then setting up a processing instruction. You'll see this when we look at the end result. It's just going to say XML question mark version equals 1.0. We have double quotes here. One escapes the other. And then the start element actually creates an XML element, and the name of that is called report. So anytime you see write start element, it's creating an open XML tag. When you see write attribute string, it's writing the attribute for that element. Write element string writes the content between the open and close tag, and so on. So you can have elements containing another. For example, this data sources tag contains a data source tag, which contains a connection properties tag, and so on. We have several write end elements which close off all those tags, and we just have some comments here specifying what it's closing off. Scroll down a little bit further. Really, this just consists of writing XML elements. Okay, so now this is where the dynamic content comes into play. We have a for each loop that's looping through our different fields. It's writing the tag called field, and then it's writing name, and then it's writing the data in there. Okay, so it's going to loop through all of your different result sets. If you have 500 employees, it's going to write all that content as XML. We can scroll down here. We're going to get just to the end here. So that is the content of our generate RDL. So now that we have that, let's just go ahead and save it. So at this point, I'm going to build this. If it gives you any errors, you can just scroll up a little bit and see what the problem is. This is actually a pretty common problem with Visual Basic. The submain was not found. All you need to do is double click on there and select that guy right there and hit OK. It's just saying that it's going to be the main focus in this project. Okay, so now we can try to rebuild this, and then let's debug it. So it'll open up this, and if it tells you RDL file generated successfully, that's a really good sign. Now we can actually look at the generated RDL. Let's make a note here. The name of our solution was generate RDL. So we're going to go into our DOS prompt here, go to where your Visual Studio 2008 projects is, and then I'm going to navigate to our generate RDL, and then do the same thing right there. Eventually we'll get there. CD to your bin directory, and then to your debug, since we were debugging. And there it is, mympreport.rdl. If you want to take a quick look at the XML format, you can just say type star.rdl, and you'll see that this is the generated information. So let's just scroll to the very top here. There it is. Okay, so remember we had that opening tag called report, and then we had the opening tag for width, data sources, and so on. it's all there. Generating RDL on the fly like this is going to save you a lot of time if you have a mass quantity of reports that you need to generate. Up until this point, we've primarily been creating Tablix reports using the wizard. What I want to now focus on is the crosstab reports, otherwise known as the matrix reports, and instead of using the wizard, we're going to manually build this. So let's open up our Business Intelligence Development Studio, and we're going to create a shared data source. Here's our connect string. We are connecting to localhost, and then our database name, and then OK. At this point, I can right-click on Reports, and instead of launching the wizard by saying Add New Report, I'm just going to say Add New Item. Then I have these different choices here. And let's select Report. You can change this name if you want to. I'm going to call mine Product Category by Region. Click Add right there. And at this point, you can click on your toolbox and you can drag and drop things over here. So I'm going to drag a matrix on here, and it's asking us for the data information, the data source. I'm just going to hit cancel so we get our skeleton matrix on there. We can now go back to our report data right here. You'll see that there are no data sets, but if you say new data set, you can then specify the data source. For example, here you can say new and go to the shared data source reference, which we had already created. And then go into our query designer. Right-click on here, we're going to add a few tables. We're interested in displaying the region as well as the product categories and what the sales and tax amounts were. So what we can do is go into select our DIM geography as well as our DIM customer. The reason why we're choosing customer is it's the go-between table between the geography and the internet sales. So here's our fact internet sales right there. We want to grab information about our products as well, so DIM product, as well as the product category and product subcategory. So the product category is the go-between between our subcategory and our product. So we can hit close now, and now we're going to select the columns that we're interested in. So I'm interested in the English country region name. I'm not going to select anything from the customer. As far as the fact internet sales, I'm interested in the sales amount and tax amount. And then for the product, I'm not interested in anything regarding the product directly, but I am curious about the product category. So here's the English product category name, and then we can hit OK. If you want to put an order by clause in there, you can. So here's the data that we're going to be extracting, and with the matrix report it asks us the columns and rows. So you can put multiple things in the columns and rows. For the columns, I want to display the product categories, so I'll just put that right there. And for the rows, I'm going to put the region name, and then for the data, we're going to put in the sales amount as well as the tax amount. Now we can preview this. So you'll see here that we have our English country region name, Canada, France, United States, and so on. Here we have bikes, accessories, clothing. If we go back into design mode, we can format these numbers to look a lot nicer. So just right-click on your sales amount. We can go to the text box properties, and under number, let's select currency, and then we'll do the same thing for the taxes. Now if you want to add some order to these names right here, you can just go back into the dataset query definition and do your order by clause right there. So I'm just going to scroll down here a little bit and do an order by English country region name. And now we can preview this again. Now you can do a little bit of cleanup, you can rename your columns and so on. And here's our end result. Now one of the things that I don't like here is that I've got these numbers, but I don't know exactly what they mean. In other words, I don't have a label that says sales amount and tax. So we can go back in here into design mode, and you can always insert rows wherever you want. So I want to insert a row above this data. So I'll just right click on here and say insert row. It's not going to be inside of the group, it's actually going to be outside of the group, so we don't have repeating labels of sales amount and tax. So it'll be outside the group but above, right there. And so this is where we can just double click in here and say sales, and here we can double click and say tax. Now when we preview this, it looks a little bit nicer. I'm going to rename this right up here to just say country. Let's go in here and just call this country. And let's look at this one last time. One more thing that I want to show you regarding reports is adding a third-party control. Out of the box, SSRS provides a good handful of controls. However, there will be times when you want to add a little bit more functionality. Well, one of the more popular providers of third-party controls is this company called Dundas. You can actually go to dundas.com, and here's their website. One of the third-party controls that you can add is their calendar. So adding third-party controls is pretty easy. All you need to do is download the trial version, and of course once you decide you like the tool you can purchase it. It's going to be a .exe file, and you just double click on it. It will automatically determine where your SSRS environment is, and then once you install it, you'll get something like this. If you look in your toolbox, you should see your third-party tool, and you simply drag and drop it just like you would with any other control. Now since this is a calendar control, you would want to make sure that your report actually has a date or time attribute to work with. And all of these third-party tools are different, but primarily you drag and drop and then you right-click on it, go to the properties, and it will launch its own property inspector. In fact, let me show you real quickly what this looks like. If you go into design mode, you can take this control and drag it on there, and you get that. And all you need to do is right-click on it, go to properties, and it has its own property editor. Okay, so you can modify the general appearance, background colors, schemas, and the most important thing is the data. So you specify the data set as well as the start date and end date and so on. Now, if you want to create your own third-party control, it's a little bit more complex. You are going to have Visual Studio and a pretty good working knowledge of the classes required to create controls. You're going to compile it into a DLL and then reference that DLL inside of your project. Let's review what we learned in this nugget. We first of all created a report template. Really all that entails is creating just a regular report which gives us an RDL file. Once you're happy with that standard look and feel that you're going to use with all your different reports, then you can save it to a special location. It's going to be under the Visual Studio 2008, and you're going to drill down until you find the private assemblies, and you'll eventually get to your project items. We then took a look at generating our RDL files. As I mentioned earlier, creating a report can be very easy graphically. However, if you have a quantity of reports that you need to generate, generating them programmatically can save you a significant amount of time. So this is where we get out our Visual Basic or C#. We import the necessary classes, and we programmatically connect to our data set, as well as issuing our SQL statement and getting the end results. So if you want to generate reports for numerous amount of SQL queries, all you need to do is create a loop and generate them one by one. When you run your Visual Basic or C# program, it's actually going to generate that RDL file in the same directory from which you executed your program. We then took a look at our crosstab or matrix reports. You can either use the wizard to generate this, or you can drag and drop from the toolbox. But really the main difference between the matrix reports and the tablix reports is that you're going to be dealing with both rows and columns, as opposed to just rows. Lastly, we talked about adding third-party controls. You're going to need to decide first of all whose third-party control you're going to be using. Go ahead and download it, and usually when you execute it, it's going to automatically install it in your environment. So when you then look at your toolbox, you'll find it in there. Well, I hope this has been informative, and I'd like to review it.